Now guys, just before we start this video, I just wanted to quickly remind you to join our AFL Fantasy and AFL tipping comps. The codes are on screen right now. All you have to do with the tipping comp is download the ESPN Footy Tips app and join up to the league. And if you win either the AFL Fantasy League or the AFL tipping comp, you will win a $100 gift voucher to the AFL store. So make sure to click the links down below, join up, and let's have some fun. But for now, let's get into today's video. So let's take a look at the pre-season injury list for every single club. Of course, we'll start with the Adelaide Crows going in alphabetical order. There are a couple of players to take a look at here, although in saying that, it is good news for the Crows as they look like they have a potential full list to pick from for round one. But there is one player to be a bit concerned about, which is Kieran Strachan. There is a couple of injury concerns as he did have foot surgery for a stress fracture in his right foot. Big man has been in a moon boot and he's back to training now, so they are hopeful that he will be ready for the round one clash if he is to be selected. Obviously, Riley O'Brien is in front of him. Other players on the injury list are Luke Pedlar, Welsh, Cumming and Miller. Isaac Cumming and Wayne Miller seem to be cleared, so I wouldn't be too concerned about them if you're a Crows fan. And Luke Pedlar and Welsh, both of them copped a knock to the shoulder in recent weeks and have been out of contact training over the past week or so, but I'd be pretty sure they'd be fine when round one rolls around. I mean, there's still about 3 weeks to go before the season starts, so I wouldn't be too concerned on those two guys. And Isaac Cumming and Wayne Miller seem pretty certain that they will be in round one selection talks for the Crows. That's good news for them. On the Brisbane Lions, bit of an interesting one, of course. They play in opening round and coming off the premiership, they would have started their preseason a little bit later. On Lincoln McCarthy and Oscar McInerney, McCarthy seems to be a potential round zero or opening round option here for the Lions. That would be great news. Oscar McInerney seems to be tracking really well after his injury in the prelim final to his shoulder. So he's going to start ramping up his contact work in the next couple of weeks in a bid to try and get into that round zero team. I wouldn't think he'd be in match sims. But speaking of match sims though, Levi Ashcroft and Henry Smith, both of them have been a little bit injury ravaged throughout the preseason, but both of them look set to be ready to go when match sims come around for the Lions. That's really good news for them. But a couple of players will be missing round zero, round one, potentially the first couple of games of the year. Darcy Gardner looks like he's tracking well and is training okay, but he won't be coming under consideration for selection in the first few weeks of the season. So a little bit disappointing. He did miss a lot of last year for the Lions, but he will be there after maybe rounds 2 or 3, I would say. Kitty Coleman looked like he was tracking towards a round zero starter, but it does seem that he has had a setback with his ACL injury. Nothing too major, but it does seem that he'll miss probably until maybe gather round. And same goes for Tom Duday. On to Carlton. Charlie Curnow did have a bit of a scare in the last week or so, but it does seem there was no structural damage, so he should be okay and tracking all right for round one. And Sam Walsh, after having a hamstring injury in the preseason, he is starting to ramp up his workload this week, which is good signs for him. So hopefully making his bid for round one. And at this stage, both of them don't seem to be ready for Match Sims or the Amy Community Series game, but keep an eye out for them in round one against the Tigers. Blake Acres, Corey Durden, and Matt Cottrell look to be at this stage that they're returning to full duties in the next couple of weeks, so they should be fine to start the season for the Blues. That's good news. Jack Silvani missed all of last year through injury. Seems like good news. He's been training a centre-half back for the Blues, and it looks like he's been playing through the match simulations for Carlton in the intra-club games, so it looks like he'll be ready for the first match sim for the Blues in the next week or so. So that's great news for Jack Silvani. Now, a couple of players have seen nowhere near selection talks in round one. First, Alex Chin-Cotter. It does seem that Alex Chin-Cotter with a hip issue, so he probably won't be playing for the first few weeks of the season. And Nick Newman unfortunately ruptured his patella in January, so he has been ruled out for the entire season, which is really terrible news for Nick Newman and the Blues. Moving on to Collingwood. Nick Dacos was the big talking point. I think it was just before Christmas or just after Christmas that he had an issue with his plantar fascia, but he has now returned to full training, so he's all good to go. Probably be ready for the match sims, which is really good news for Pies fans. Lockie Sullivan played a few games last year as a mature age recruit. He is recovering from a calf injury, but should be fine for opening round if he is selected for the Pies. Reef McGuinness, Mason Cox, and Tom Mitchell, all unknown as to when they will return. So the Pies are really keeping this under wraps. Reef McGuinness has been a really good contributor in the preseason so far, but unfortunately he's been sidelined over the last few weeks. So we'll have to wait and see on Reef McGuinness. And Tom Mitchell, he's a real question mark. I'd be surprised if he's there in opening round. And unfortunately, the big one for Jordan De Goey, after starting the preseason trying to treat some soft tissue issues in Qatar, and after getting back to full training, unfortunately, he suffered bone bruising on his knee. So I think they're going to take a super cautious approach with Jordan De Goey. I'd be a little bit surprised if he's going to play many games for round 0. Maybe he'll be ready for round 0, but we'll have to wait and see. On Essendon, Darcy Parish and Sam Durham look like they both won't be playing in the match simulations against the Western Bulldogs this week, but should be able to play against Geelong in the Amy Community Series game, which is good news. Jordan Ridley seems to have had a injury setback and will miss the Dogs clash in the match simulation with a hamstring, and pretty unknown at this stage if we're ready for round 0. Matt Guelphy was the big sad news. Unfortunately, he's going to need surgery on his hamstring, and he's going to miss at least 10 to 12 weeks. So probably just at the end of the first half of the season, unfortunately for him. Now, Alan Davey underwent knee surgery after a promising pre-season. He's potentially be back to training in the next 2 to 4 weeks. I'd be a little bit surprised if he's going to be back for round 0 because they play against the Gold Coast. So keep your eye on Alan Davey, but I'd be surprised if he's in the first couple of weeks. I think he'll probably be out. Good news though for the Bombers, Jai Caldwell and Ben Mackay have had some injury concerns over the off-season, but set to be ready when the campaign begins. And a couple of young guys, Archer Day Wicks, Jaden Newen, and Zach Johnson, have not been in contact work at training so far, so a little bit unknown as to when they'll be returning for the Bombers. On Fremantle, a couple of interesting ones. First is Shea Bolton, suffered a minor calf strain in training last week, placing him in some doubt for the Indigenous All-Stars game, so we'll have to wait and see on that front. Teammate Hayden Young was also ruled out with a low-grade hamstring strain, so he won't be playing in the match simulation. Potentially will be playing in the Community Series game, but more likely I think they'll just leave him out and play him in round 1. Sean Darcy seemed to have finally got back to some consistency in the preseason, lost a lot of weight, but unfortunately in training last week had a setback, and it doesn't look like he'll be playing for the first couple of rounds of the season. So that's really unfortunate for Sean Darcy. A couple of others here. Alex Pearce, there's been a little bit of concerns if he's going to be playing in the Indigenous All-Stars game. I think he'll play. There's been some doubt over him, but at this stage, I think an ankle issue won't keep him out of that game. And Quinton Narkle and Brendan Walker, a little bit of unknowns as to if they will be okay, but at this stage, I think both of them will be up for selection when round 1 rolls around. So good news for Fremantle. On the Cats, haven't had many injury concerns over the off-season. The real big one is Cam Guthrie. Only played 10 games last year, dealing with a toe and Achilles issues, and at training last week was restricted to kicking with teammates before heading off the track. So I'd be very surprised if Cam Guthrie is around the mark when round 0 rolls around, or round 1. I think he'll be waiting till maybe early in the season, but again, it's a little bit unknown. The Cats tend to not tell too much when it comes to injury concerns, and Toby Conway underwent surgery mid-July with a stretch fracture in his foot. Hasn't been spotted at training last week, and Geelong have really provided no update on him either, so a little bit of an unknown there on Toby Conway. On the Gold Coast, the real concern at the moment is Sam Flanders. He's had a back complaint, and although he's been running pretty strongly, he's unable to do any contact work. So a little bit of an unknown if he's going to be ready for opening round. They do think that it'll be okay as long as he can get through training over the next month or so. I would be pretty surprised if he plays in match sims or community series games. Good news though is the recruit from the Tigers and Dan Rioli probably won't be ready to go for the match simulation, but seems all but certain to be playing against the Sydney Swans in the Amy Community Series. And same goes for Will Graham. He's on the way back from a hamstring injury and should be able to integrate into the main group for training in the coming weeks, and may play match sim, but more likely community series games for him. On the Giants, they are pretty hopeful that Josh Kelly will feature in the match simulations in the next week or so that's good news. Same kind of story goes for Kieran Briggs. Had an operation on his knee across the break and most likely will return to full duties pretty soon, and both of them should be available for practice matches. Steve Cornelio should be returning in the coming weeks following shoulder surgery, but the club is yet to determine if he'll feature in any of the scratch matches. So probably not going to be risks if I'm the Giants. So probably round 0, maybe round 1 in the early rounds for him. Toby Bedford is returning from a quad issue. He's back on the track and should be okay for opening round. That's good news. And that's pretty much all we got for the Giants. So we move on to Hawthorn. Unfortunately, it does seem Mitch Lewis and James Blank, the both of them, won't be featuring at least for the first half of 2025. So wouldn't be expecting them returning to the Hawks lineup until after the buys at this stage. Cal Shadir is working back after a stress reaction in his back and is facing a delayed start to the season. So a little bit unknown at this stage with Cal Shadir, but probably the first third of the season you won't be seeing him on the field. James Sicily and Will Day have both recovered from the off-season surgery and are set to play practice matches. So really good news for James Sicily. He hasn't been seen a lot on the track, but that's good news for the Hawks. Sam Frost is building his conditioning after recovering from a stress fracture in his foot. So that's really good to see. You'd expect him to play in community series games or the match sims. And Connor McDonald and Jai Newcomb have had a little bit of issues over the last week or so. Jai Newcomb had a corked thigh from their training camp, and Connor McDonald had a little bit of an ankle issue, but that's not going to keep them out of match simulations. They'll both be fine. On Melbourne, a really tough injury for Colton Tholstrup. Everyone thought that he was going to be one of the big risers for the Demons this year, but unfortunately he's going to miss at least 10 to 12 weeks after scans revealed a bone stress issue, which is really unfortunate for him, while rookie forward in Luca Kentfield is facing a delayed start to the season after a lengthy stint in the hospital with complications with pneumonia. Jake Melsham suffered a hamstring tear last week with no timeline on his return. But let's move to some good news for the Demons. So Christian Petrarca is nearing a return to full fitness after recovering from a cracked rib he suffered at training. Max Gawn has rejoined the main group after spending the past 6 weeks with no contact work after fracturing his voice box, so that's good news. Jake Lever has also returned to full training after off-season shoulder and knee surgery. Cade Chandler and Judd McVie, a little bit on modified trainings at this stage, but expect to do full contact work the next week or so. So I'd be expecting they're going to be playing match sims. Other than a couple of injury concerns with a couple of young guys and Jake Melksham, seems like the Demons will be picking from a pretty full list going into round one. North Melbourne. George Wardlaw, of course, is the unlucky story, suffering a high-grade hamstring strain. He's probably going to be missing the majority of the first half of the season, so that's really unfortunate for him. He looked like he was going to be growing into something big. In better news, though, Aiden Court, Will Dawson have been rejoining the main group in the past week or so after undergoing off-season surgery, so it's really good news. It's also hoped that Josh Gota will be fit for the start of the season after suffering a ruptured Achilles last year. And Braden George could be fit for the start of the season as well, as he's recovered from his ACL injury, which he sustained last year. Callum Coleman-Jones, unfortunately, is set to miss the majority of the first half of the season as he's still recovering from his Achilles injury. But overall, pretty decent news for a lot of the North Melbourne players. But of course, the tragic story of George Wardlaw and Cal Coleman-Jones still are big issues that won't be in selection talks early for the season for North. On to Port Adelaide. Sam Powell-Pepper seems all but ready to be integrated into the main group in 2025 after suffering an ACL injury last year. Powell-Pepper is still in non-contact work, but is expected to resume full training in the next week or so, and then should be up for selection in round one, which is great news. Missed him a lot last year, Port Adelaide. Kane Farrell missed last season's final series with a hamstring injury, but he's fully recovered now. He started to join intra-club match simulations in the last week or so. So has Ivan Soldo. So both of them will be up for selection. If both of them are up for selection, Kane Farrell, I think, will definitely be in their best 22. Ivan Soldo, maybe not so much. Willem Drew did have a bit of an injury concern just after Christmas, I believe, with a plantar fascia, but it seems like he's going to be resuming running in the coming days. He'll be playing at least one preseason game, probably the community series game, I would imagine. And Joe Berry suffered a poke to the eye last week on light duties, but that's not going to keep him out from a debut early in the season. Todd Marshall, he's taken his first few steps in following his surgery on his ruptured Achilles tendon. Maybe in the second half of the year, Todd Marshall will return, but I highly doubt it for Port. Now, the Tigers have had a pretty tough pre-season in terms of injuries. Of course, a lot of younger players probably aren't really ready to the rigors of pre-season training. The quintet of ACL injuries, which include Judson Clark, McKelty Lafau, Tyler Young, Josh Gibcus, and Taj Houghton, remain some way off of returning. It does seem that Judson Clark is the earliest to return, sometime in April. Josh Gibcus had a little bit of an injury setback, and he won't be ready till probably after 6 rounds into the season. And Tyler Young, Lafau, and Houghton seem very unlikely to be early in the season. There's a little bit of an unknown with those three guys. Tom Lynch did suffer a concussion when in training last week, but I'd expect that if he's not going to play in match sims, he'll most likely play in the community series games. Josh Smiley did suffer a minor hamstring injury during match simulation, and maybe an outside chance to feature in the practice matches. But overall, I think he'll be ready when round one rolls around. I think he'll get a debut pretty early on. On the Saints, they've had a horror run during the off-season. The big talking points so far are Dougal Howard and Mateus Filippo. Both of them are set to miss at least a few months of the season. Better news on Rowan Marshall. It is expected that he will play round one, along with Hunter Clark. They seem like to be going pretty well. Liam Henry's a bit of a 50-50 chance for round one. We'll just have to wait and see on his front. Alex Toro seems to be continuing his recovery from his back issue. A little bit of an unknown unknown at this stage. And it seems that Paddy Dow's going to be missing pretty much the majority of the first couple of rounds of the season following surgery from a serious infection. Paddy Dow, a bit of an unknown at this stage, but I'd be expecting him in the early rounds. On to the Swans. Logan McDonald is the big talking point. It is a bit of uncertain if he will be ready to start the season following his post-season ankle surgery. He is yet to resume full training at this stage, and the club is saying that he has been delayed, but not providing any clear output as to when he will return. I'd think in the early rounds we'll see Logan McDonald, but he may not play an opening round or the first couple of games. We'll have to wait and see. Hayden McLean has only recommenced training this week after managing his groin issue that he's had over the off-season. I think Hayden McLean may be a wait and see. I'd expect him to be ready for the Community Series games, if not maybe round 0. Personally, I think that Sydney may take the cautious approach here. I think that Hayden McLean's a very important player for the Swans. And then a couple of younger guys for the Swans. Draftee and Jesse Totoli is resuming running in the next 2 to 4 weeks, along with Will Edwards and Jake Buller. Probably the next month or so they'll be resuming full training. Will Edwards, on the other hand, probably misses the first half of the season, as he did fracture his leg last December, so I wouldn't be expecting him for the first half of the season for Sydney. But overall, they have a pretty good injury list at this stage for Swans. On West Coast, of course, the massive news of Dom Sheed will miss the entirety of the 2025 season after rupturing his ACL, so it's really unfortunate for the Premiership hero. We also have Elliot Yeo. He's going to miss the first month of the season. Harley Reid has been managed with a sore ankle, with a bit of a stop-start sort of summer, along with Jake Waterman, who's missed recent training sessions through back soreness, but both of them should be returning to full training in the next week or so. Maybe ready for match sim, but we'll have to wait and see. Same goes for Liam Baker. Seems like he's back in full training now. He had a bit of an ankle scare, but he'll be ready for match sims, I'd imagine. Callum Jamieson is rehabilitating after ankle and knee operations last year. Very much an unknown. Same goes with Rhett Bazzo as to when they will be returning. And Campbell Chesser has endured an interrupted pre-season with lower leg issues, but is now ramping up his program. So it's still a little bit unknown with Chesser, but he looks like he's more likely to be close to the early rounds for the Eagles for selection. And finally, we get to the Western Bulldogs. Liam Jones and Jason Johannesson, some of the bigger injury concerns. They'll be out for at least a couple of months due to high-grade hamstring strains. And Liam Jones is arguably one of the better defenders in the comp right now, so that's really unfortunate for the Western Bulldogs, which is kind of their weaker line. Adam Treloar endured several calf strains, and he's going to have a delayed start to the season. So first time All-Australian last year, Adam Treloar was been really important for the Bulldogs. Of course, they've lost a couple of players, a couple of depth players, and now Adam Treloar is out, so that's really unfortunate for them. Good news though, it does seem that Aaron Norton and Cody Waitman, even though they've been on modified programs, both contributed in the recent intra-club game and look set for round 1. Maybe playing the Community Series games, those two, but they seem certain to be playing in round 1. And it does seem that Anthony Scott is a little bit of a 50-50 if he will be ready for round 1, suffering a kneecap injury, which is really unfortunate. Nick Caulfield also in a race against time. Jamara Ugle-Hagan is still been away from the club, dealing with personal issues, and doesn't seem clear when he's going to return. So I'd be very surprised if Jamara is anywhere near the first couple of rounds for selection for the Bulldogs. And finally, Tim English. Doesn't look like he's got too many concerns. There was a little bit of issues with the abdominal strains, but he looks certain and ready to go for the Bulldogs as the season rolls around. So that's good news for the Bulldogs. But guys, that's basically all we have for the injury list going over the season. So hopefully a lot of those players will be fine for their first game of the season. But at this stage, it seems that we've had a lot of injuries over this pre-season. So I just wanted to give you guys a quick recap about how all the teams are going on the injury front.